We need to set up our units, like whether you're going to measure in feet and inches or so on. So document settings, units, that's one way to get to it. Don't remember, I've actually added it to my right mouse click, so I can go to units here. So you need to set the units in the style that you like to work. So if you like millimeters, set the units in millimeters. I use decimal with 1 decimal place. No decimal places, but rounding to the nearest 1 millimeter. If you like drawing in meters, then by all means change to meters. Set your rounding to maybe 3 decimal places and a rounding base of, say, 5. Decimal rounding base of 1 allows you to dimension very high accuracy, but always rounding the dimensions here to the nearest 5 millimeters. So that's if you like millimeters. If you like feet and inches, then set these up the way you like, using fractional, rounding to the nearest 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch. So when you're doing concept drawings, you maybe want to have higher rounding, so always rounding to the nearest 1/2 an inch, for example. For millimeters, again, this is the way I like to work. I like to use millimeters. I like to measure my area in square meters. If you prefer to use square feet, that's okay. You can actually have square feet for the area while you've got millimeters for the length. So that's fine. Square meters, there we are, that's how I like it. Let's look at dual dimensions. Now I quite like having meters as my dual dimensions. I show the unit mark as a decimal position, 3 decimal places, rounding to the nearest 5. What this does give me, if I've got a 1 meter dimension, it goes 1.000, this is the trailing zeros here, and if it's a little bit over, it'll always round it to the nearest 5 meters. Now the reason I've got dual dimensions and different dimensions for my length is that when I create a dimension standard, I can choose the dimension standard to use either the general display dimensions or these dual dimensions, which Vectorworks calls secondary dimensions. So you can choose either one of those. If you've got clients that like imperial measurements, then you could have primary dimensions or the general display as millimeters, dual dimensions as feet and inches, and that would work pretty well. I'm just going to place a dimension because the next thing I want to talk about is dimension standards. So let's just place a dimension here. Now when you get Vectorworks, it has lots of dimension standards. There's one for architects, ASME, and so on. So there's lots of different dimension standards you can choose from. But the idea is choose one that suits you best. For me it's this one here, the architectural one. Now we're going to create our own custom dimension standard. Now the reason it's important to choose the one you like best up here before you choose custom standards is that when we create a custom standard, Vectorworks will start with a copy of this dimension standard. So click new and we'll call this plans. Okay, let's edit it. So we can change these things. Now you can't make this a 0, but you can make it 0.01. Now I'm using millimeters. If I was using inches, these would be represented in inches on the printed page. So for example, once it's come out of the printer, this is the sizes of things when they come out the printer. 1.5, let's make that 3. I like fixed witness line length, that's my preference. If you don't know what that is, you'll need to try it just to get an idea. I'm going to choose linear markers. Now when I get to my linear markers, you'll notice that my markers are different. I have some preset with a thickness and a line weight, a length, an angle, things that suit me. And I'm not going to worry about a text style at the moment. If you do have a text style, you can assign a text style to your dimensions so that they're always printed in the same style, the same font, size, and so on. Okay, let's try that and see what it looks like. Plans. And that's how I want mine to look. So that's better. Now I'm going to choose plans as my standard. Custom standards again. I'm going to create a new one, call it site plans. Now this is going to be a copy of my plans. When I edit it, you'll see all my settings are identical. One thing I want to change is my dual dimension, I want secondary only, and OK. Now watch what happens. When I choose site plans, I end up with meter dimensions. Plans, I've got millimeters. And notice it rounds my site dimensions off to the nearest 5 millimeters. Another thing we can do to help ourselves is to create layers for our concept model. Now we're going to need a few layers. Layers are sort of horizontal chunks of information. We really need to have an import layer. We should really have a site model layer, and we should probably have a concept or a site plan layer. So we need a layer for our site model, the three-dimensional thing, and we need a layer where we can actually draw our concept. So let's create a series of layers. First of all, for a concept drawing, a scale of 1 to 50 probably doesn't work. So let's edit this one and we'll call it base drawing. Let's change the scale, and I'm going to make the scale 1 to 250. Now 1 to 250 is not actually here, but if I type 250, that's now a layer scale of 1 to 250. I could duplicate that, or I can just create a new one. This is going to be called site plan. I quite often use the word mod in front, so I know that it's not a sheet layer by accident. Mod site model. And then another one, mod dash site plan. So I've got these three layers, they're all the same scale. Having the same scale will save problems later on if we want to use the unified view, which is just here. That'll save me some effort. Click OK, and that will save those. Just check these. Got my Z's, my delta Z's, all at the heights that I want at the moment. I might have to come back and change them, but we'll see. When we create a concept model, we might find that having lots of classes could be really useful. So if you create the classes ahead of time, they'll be there ready to use when you need them. Also, if we save this file as a template, they'll be really useful because they'll already be in the file. We won't have to go create them. I'm going to make a bunch of classes. I'm going to call them massing model classes. Massing model dash existing walls. Okay, now when I create a class, one of the things I could do, for example, is to control the color and the line weight and things. So let's duplicate that and double click on it and I'll edit it. So this is going to be existing roof. I better use a capital R for that. So once again, we got exactly the same color, the same line weight, same line style, and so on. If you wanted to emphasize the line weight, you could do that a bit, but for an existing model, I think it's better to leave it on a thin line. So let's select both of those, right click and duplicate. So now I've got existing roof 2, get rid of that number 2, and this is going to be proposed roof. So I can have a class for an existing site model and a proposed site model. I'm going to give this a slight grey colour and a slightly heavier line, and this will help it stand out when I create massing models with that class on them. Let's edit this one as well. We're going to give this maybe a slight browny colour so that when I go to 3D view, these walls won't look the same as the other existing walls. So let's just change the name of that to proposed walls. So I've got classes for existing roof, proposed roof. Now it's going to be useful depending on what we do later on. You might find it quite useful to have a whole lot of classes already in there. Classes to do with existing site, existing house, and so on. So let's have a class called site dash existing site. Let's edit those properties so that we can control it straight away. And that's going to have user creation, no fill, and a dashed line. So we could duplicate this again. This one's going to be proposed site 1. proposed site 1. This might have no fill again. Let's give it a blue line. Yeah, make that heavier. And OK. Duplicate that. Propose site 2. Let's change its color. So now we've got a couple of different sites. This will allow us to do a little kind of like a subdivision with at least a couple of different sites, and we can use the classes to measure and control those, or to schedule, count and report those areas. Yeah, good, that's got a dashed line, that's what I wanted. So you can carry on and make more of these if you like. I probably will before I save it as a template. The other way to do it is you can have a layer in class standard. I'm not going to cover that here, but you could use this to import classes that you've already created. If we've gone to a lot of trouble and created a lot of classes that we need, and we've created layers that we need, and dimension standards that we need, and so on, it would be a great idea to save this file as a template. That way, every time you get started, already some of the work's done. File on the menu bar, save as template. I'm going to call this concept because it's what I use for a concept plan. If you call it default, every time you start Vectorworks you will end up with this file as your starter. So you can call it concept. Let's save that. Now when I create a new file, I should be able to go to use document template and find my concept drawing. And when I start that up, it's got the right layers, it's got some of the classes I need, it's got some of the scales I need, and I'm ready to start work.